She said I shouldn't be here at night, but when she opened the door, everything changed. The night had grown quiet, the streets outside slick with the remnants of an afternoon drizzle. I walked up to the apartment building, my bag heavy on my shoulder, and the chill in the air nudging me awake. The hallway light flickered slightly as I reached the front door, painting soft shadows along the walls. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of her apartment light. She looked composed, as always, but there was something in her expression that made me pause, an almost imperceptible flicker of surprise, quickly masked by calm authority. Even at a distance, I could tell she was graceful. The way she leaned slightly on the doorframe, one hand resting lightly on the wood, gave her presence a quiet, effortless elegance. "Good evening," she said, her voice even, yet there was a softness in it that made the ordinary greeting feel personal. I realized I was holding the door handle for too long, caught off guard by her calm presence and the faint warmth radiating from where she stood. Good evening," I replied, my voice a little higher than usual. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in, and our hands brushed for a fraction of a second. It was accidental, but the warmth of her touch lingered far longer than it should have. That brief contact was enough to make me aware of her calm confidence, the subtle strength in her posture, and the tiny, graceful movements that made her seem so composed even in the simplest gestures. As I stepped inside, the faint scent of her perfume reached me, delicate yet unmistakable, a mixture of jasmine and something softer, warmer that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to feel intimate in the quiet apartment hallway. I noticed how the soft light reflected on her features, the way her eyes held a flicker of curiosity, maybe amusement at my clumsiness, and the slight tilt of her head that made her expression almost unreadable. "Shouldn't you be home already?" she asked, a subtle note of concern threading through her words. But it wasn't reproachful, there was warmth beneath the surface, an invitation for conversation she hadn't yet voiced. I swallowed, unsure whether to explain myself or simply stay silent. I just got back," I said finally, my gaze caught by the way her hand rested casually on the doorframe, fingers relaxed, yet somehow commanding attention without trying. For a moment, the world narrowed to the two of us, the faint hum of the hallway, the distant sound of rain, and that brief, accidental touch that neither of us acknowledged out loud, but that left a quiet heat in its wake. That night, arriving late had never felt so alive, so charged with possibilities, and so quietly intimate. Once inside, the apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old books, a combination that felt unexpectedly comforting. The soft hum of the ceiling light above cast a warm glow over the living room, revealing the subtle details of her space, neatly stacked magazines, a small potted plant perched on the windowsill, and a framed photo she glanced at briefly before setting her gaze back on me. "I wasn't expecting anyone at this hour," she said lightly, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. There was no judgment, just that quiet attentiveness that made me feel like I mattered, even in my tired, distracted state. I just had some errands that ran late," I replied, trying to sound casual. My words sounded clumsy in the quiet room, and I felt the familiar heat rise to my cheeks. She noticed, of course. Her lips curved into the smallest, almost imperceptible smile, and I realized I couldn't look away. We moved toward the small kitchen table, a subtle dance of proximity that left our knees almost touching. She poured tea into 2 mugs, the steam curling up between us like a soft veil. When she handed me mine, our fingers brushed again. Just a fleeting touch, but it sent a spark up my arm. Her hand was warm, the skin soft, with a gentle firmness that spoke of care and confidence. I lingered an extra second too long before pulling my hand back, aware of the charged silence that had settled around us. "So, how has your week been?" she asked, settling into her chair, her posture relaxed yet undeniably graceful. I took a sip of the tea, noticing the faint sweetness and warmth that seemed to seep into my chest. Her eyes were steady on me, patient yet subtly probing, as if she could see the thoughts I wasn't speaking aloud. "It's been busy," I said, and laughed nervously at how inadequate that sounded. She tilted her head, the light catching the slight shimmer in her hair, and gave me a look that was equal parts amused and empathetic. I realized, with an almost startling clarity, that she noticed everything, the way I fiddled with the edge of my sleeve, the way my gaze darted to the floor before meeting hers again. For a few minutes, we sat in companionable silence, the conversation flowing in hesitant starts and pauses. The warmth of her presence was grounding, yet thrilling. There was an unspoken tension that neither of us addressed directly, but that made every glance, every slight touch, feel heavy with meaning. In those moments, I understood why arriving late had felt different, because being here, even in this ordinary space, felt charged with possibilities I didn't yet know how to name. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I found myself lingering on details I hadn't noticed before. The way her fingers lightly traced the rim of her tea mug, the subtle creases at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the quiet strength in the way she carried herself, all of it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. There was a calm authority in her presence, yet beneath it, I sensed something fragile, something that made her human, approachable, and achingly real. She caught me staring for a split second, and her lips quirked up in a smile that made my stomach flutter. I quickly looked away, embarrassed, but a small part of me wished I could keep my gaze fixed. There was an unspoken awareness between us now, a recognition that the air around us had subtly shifted. My mind raced with the implications of her age, her life experience, the quiet elegance she exuded, and yet, there was no judgment, only an inexplicable pull that made proximity feel electric. I leaned against the doorway, feeling the cool frame against my shoulder, and watched her as she adjusted the cushion on the chair beside her. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, and oddly intimate in their simplicity. When she glanced up, our eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow down to just that, two people, standing or sitting in ordinary positions, yet aware of something extraordinary developing in the space between them. "Are you tired?" she asked softly, her voice cutting through my swirling thoughts. There was genuine concern there, subtle yet grounding. I nodded, unsure if she could sense how much more than tired I actually was, nervous, curious, conflicted. "I suppose it's late for visitors," I said, trying to sound casual, though every word felt like it carried more weight than I intended. She laughed quietly, a warm, melodic sound that made the room feel smaller, closer, and oddly safe. Her eyes lingered on me in a way that made me hyper-aware of my own reactions, the way my hands fidgeted with the hem of my sleeve, the slight quickening of my heartbeat, the small intake of breath as I shifted to face her more directly. I realized she noticed everything, the subtle tremors of my nervousness, the quiet curiosity behind my smile, and it made me acutely aware of my own conflicted feelings. That night, I understood that the connection between us was growing, subtle but undeniable. There was a tension that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore, a magnetic awareness that made every glance, every accidental brush of hands, feel loaded with meaning. The slow, steady pull of attraction and emotional curiosity had begun, and I knew the night was far from over. The rain outside had turned steady, tapping rhythmically against the windows and the balcony door. Its soft, persistent sound filled the apartment, creating a cocooned world that made the outside hours feel distant and irrelevant. We found ourselves lingering in the hallway, both reluctant to part ways yet unsure how to navigate the space between casual conversation and something more personal. "You always stay out this late?" she asked, her voice light but carrying an undercurrent of concern. She brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, the gesture casual yet intimate, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. For a moment, I thought she might shiver from the sudden draft, and without thinking, I slid my sweater off and draped it over her shoulders. She froze for a heartbeat, then smiled softly, her eyes meeting mine in a glance that said more than words could convey. The warmth of her body against the soft fabric pressed into my hands subtly, sending a quiet ripple of awareness through me. I realized in that moment that our proximity wasn't just physical, it was emotional, an unspoken understanding that we were both looking for comfort in ways neither of us had expected. We moved into the living room to escape the chill, settling near the window where the rain blurred the city lights outside. She began to talk quietly, sharing a story about her own struggles with loneliness, the kind that creeps in quietly after years of managing everything on your own. Her voice was calm, almost measured, but I could hear the subtle vulnerability beneath the surface, the pauses, the slight catch in her tone, the way her gaze softened as she spoke. I listened, my hands wrapped around my own mug of tea, feeling the warmth seep into my chest. I wanted to say something reassuring, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I let her speak, giving her my full attention, leaning slightly closer without realizing it. When she mentioned the fleeting moments of doubt she experienced, I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing hers on the armrest. It was a fleeting touch, barely noticeable, yet it carried the weight of empathy, connection, and silent reassurance. The rain's gentle percussion outside mirrored the rhythm of our breathing in the quiet room. For the first time that evening, the air between us was free of awkwardness. There was a trust forming in those soft, shared moments, a recognition that both of us were capable of vulnerability and willing to meet each other there. The slow-burn tension had shifted, softened into something warmer, more intimate. In that small cocoon of rain, tea, and quiet conversation, I realized that this connection wasn't fleeting, it was real, fragile, and entirely worth holding close. By the time we moved to the small living room, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, pattering lightly against the windowpane. The soft glow of the lamp cast golden reflections across the room, warming the space and making everything feel intimate, yet safe. She motioned toward the small kitchen counter with a teasing smile. "Do you even know how to make tea properly?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, a playful lilt in her voice. Her gaze held a challenge, light but deliberate, and I felt a familiar flutter of anticipation ripple through me. I think I do," I replied, trying to sound confident, though my fingers betrayed me, fumbling slightly with the kettle. She laughed softly, a sound that was both musical and comforting, and I realized just how much I was drawn to it. As I stirred the tea, she leaned against the counter, watching me intently. Every so often, her fingers brushed mine while passing utensils or reaching for sugar, accidental on the surface but deliberate in its effect. The warmth of her hand, the brief contact, made my heart skip in ways I wasn't prepared for. Even in ordinary movements, there was an electricity between us, a subtle acknowledgement of curiosity and attraction neither of us fully admitted aloud. "You're holding the spoon all wrong," she teased, tilting her head and giving me a look that made my stomach tighten pleasantly. I glanced at her, caught in the soft, golden lamplight, noticing the gentle curve of her smile and the slight sparkle in her eyes. The way she leaned slightly toward me, just enough that our arms almost touched, made the room feel charged, intimate, yet utterly safe. "Maybe you should show me, then," I said, a hint of challenge in my voice now, feeling bolder than usual. She smiled knowingly, and for a moment, we were caught in a silent exchange of subtle flirtation. We moved closer to the table, laughter filling the pauses as she guided me through the proper way to brew tea. Each touch, passing the sugar, nudging my elbow gently to adjust my grip, was fleeting but meaningful. The warmth of her body near mine, the gentle pressure of her hand against mine, and the soft brush of her hair as she leaned in to correct me all combined to make my chest feel simultaneously light and tight. By the time the tea was ready, the playful tension had become a comfortable intimacy, layered with quiet anticipation. The unspoken connection between us had deepened, not just through conversation, but through the tiny gestures, the lingering glances, and the warmth shared in those small, ordinary moments. The night was slowly revealing a rhythm of its own, one in which laughter, touch, and subtle flirtation created a safe space for emotions neither of us yet had the courage to name aloud. By now, the rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, and the room was filled with a quiet stillness, punctuated only by the occasional drip from the balcony. We sat on the couch, each holding a warm cup of tea, the steam curling upward between us. The earlier laughter had faded into a comfortable silence, the kind that feels heavier than words and yet somehow safer. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing mine, a casual motion that somehow made my heart skip. Her hand rested on the armrest, close enough that the warmth radiated toward me. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers and realized she must be aware of our closeness as much as I was. I swallowed, suddenly conscious of every breath, every subtle movement, every glance. "You've been quiet," she said softly, tilting her head just enough to catch the light in her eyes. There was curiosity there, but also a hint of something deeper, vulnerability, maybe, or anticipation. I wanted to tell her that my thoughts were consumed by her, that the way she looked at me made me feel seen in a way no one else had, but the words lodged stubbornly in my throat. Instead, I nodded, letting the silence speak. She shifted closer, and when her fingers brushed mine while reaching for her tea, it wasn't accidental. The touch lingered, gentle and grounding, and I felt an unexpected warmth spread through my chest. Our eyes met, holding each other's gaze longer than necessary, and in that moment, the space between playfulness and something more serious dissolved. She exhaled softly, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of her own hesitation. "It's rare, you know," she murmured, her voice barely above the hum of the rain, "to meet someone who actually listens." Her words struck a chord, and I realized that our connection wasn't just about attraction, it was trust, understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of loneliness shared without pretense. I reached out instinctively, letting my hand hover near hers, not daring to close the gap completely but wanting her to feel the presence I offered. Her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly, as if she were considering the gesture, weighing propriety against impulse. For a few moments, we simply sat there, knees touching lightly, hands close but not yet entwined, breathing in tandem. The slow-burn tension had reached its peak, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet intimacy of proximity, the warmth of shared vulnerability, and the unspoken awareness that both of us wanted more but were savoring the suspense. In that still, golden-lit room, it became clear, this wasn't fleeting curiosity. It was a connection that demanded patience, attention, and care. And as the night deepened around us, we both knew that the next steps, whenever they came, would be taken together, deliberately, and with mutual understanding. The rain had finally tapered off, leaving the streets glistening under the faint glow of streetlights. Inside the apartment, the soft hum of the ceiling light cast a warm, golden hue over the room. We both lingered, neither eager to break the delicate rhythm we had found over the evening. Every glance, every breath, seemed amplified in the quiet comfort of shared space. She moved toward the doorway to see me out, her posture graceful yet slightly hesitant, as if she were measuring the boundaries of propriety and desire. I followed, each step deliberate, acutely aware of the warmth she radiated, the subtle fragrance of her perfume that lingered in the hallway. The world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the small bubble we had created inside these walls. At the threshold, we paused. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder, not in authority, but in reassurance and familiarity. The touch was fleeting, yet grounding, and I felt a steady warmth seep into my chest. Her eyes held mine, soft and luminous, as if silently acknowledging the journey we had shared that evening, the laughter, the small touches, the quiet confessions, and the vulnerability that had been exchanged without words. "You should get home safely," she said, her voice low and intimate, yet measured with care. There was a hint of playfulness in the corner of her mouth, but also a depth of sincerity that made the moment feel precious. "I will," I replied softly, reluctant to step out of her presence, reluctant to let the night end. "Thank you, for tonight." Her lips curved into a gentle smile, the kind that lingered in memory even after she turned away. And then, almost instinctively, we brushed hands again as I adjusted my bag. It was a subtle, deliberate gesture, an acknowledgement of connection, a promise that this wasn't the last time. The warmth of her hand, the slight pressure against mine, conveyed far more than words could, a mutual understanding, a shared tension now softened into trust and intimacy. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed the quiet strength in her stance, the way she held herself with composure yet allowed a small vulnerability to show in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized the night had given us something rare, a bond rooted in respect, quiet desire, and emotional honesty. The apartment door closed softly behind me, but the warmth remained. The memory of her presence, the subtle touches, and the unspoken words lingered like a gentle echo. It wasn't a rush of passion, but a steady, comforting connection that promised more conversations, more laughter, and more moments of quiet intimacy. The slow burn had reached its natural conclusion, leaving us both with the knowledge that what had begun tonight was only the beginning of something real, meaningful, and entirely worth cherishing. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. And let me know in the comments, what moment made your heart skip a beat tonight?